Thank you very much for taking part in our project, Age of Catastrophe. Can you tell me a bit more about Dark Matter, the work you're presenting at Actual Gallery?
Dark Matter probably got its birth in about 1985, when a woman who had come to see my installation, Very Nervous System, asked if she could bring a blind piano student, 5 years old, who she was teaching, to see my installation. And I had it set up in my bedroom, as I remember, because that was the only space that was large enough. And this child walked into the room and encountered the edge. Very Nervous System uses a camera-like system to analyze movement. So the camera has an edge. The camera's field of view has an edge. And when the child hit the edge and heard the sounds that were resulting from his encounter with the system, he bounced off the edge as though it was a physical barrier. And that was really striking to me. It was really literally as though he'd hit a wall and bounced off it. And I realized that there were intensities of experiencing the world through sound that were much beyond what I had experienced directly. So that's kind of a birth marker for this piece. It does draw on the work I did in the 80s with Very Nervous System, which was a system that used cameras to look at movement and transform it into music. But it extends it in a couple of ways. In fact, it builds off a version of Very Nervous System that was created in Winnipeg, of all things, for a show at Ace Art. So in 2003, I was invited by Ace Art to revisit the work I'd done for Very Nervous System. And to be honest, I was physically repulsed by the idea of revisiting Very Nervous System. It made me want to vomit, because I think I'd gone so deep into that work so far and spent so much time at it that then the idea of trying to get myself back into that space was unimaginable. So what I did was I went back to some of the ground, the ferment out of which Very Nervous System arose. And so I went back to an early moment when I realized that musical composition was going to be a challenge for me for reasons that are hard to trace. This is becoming a long answer.
Yeah, it's kind of going into my second question, but it is
okay.
Fine, thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That.
So this is the second grounding then that I'm talking about, is going into, at art school, going into the sound studio to doing 8-track sort of musique concrète layering of sound. I'd gone out onto the street with a stereo Walkman Pro to record street sounds, and I'd gone in and I was mixing it, layering it, and stuff like that. And I found, to my pleasure and to my distress, that every way I put the sounds together sounded good. I liked every way I put the sounds together, and that was a bit of a problem when you think about the composer as an author. So I thought, so what is my role as an artist? And I realized that what I wanted to do was not to order those sounds in time, but to make the possibility of those sounds live for any listener, so they could remix and rearrange the sounds as they felt. And so that was a shoot I didn't take with Very Nervous System, because I went in another direction. But that's where I returned to in 2003 for Ace Art. So I worked with sounds that were very tactile, that had a physical sense to them, and I positioned them loosely in space using a fairly primitive scenario, but in a way that made it really drew to your mind the texture of the sound, the fact that sound is a tactile experience, and you're feeling your way in a lit space, though, towards sound. So when I started to work on Dark Matter, I was combining those two things: the working in the dark, coming from this experience with the blind child, and my own experience of the intensity of sound when your eyes are closed or when you're in a darkened space, and this notion of a collection of sounds that were interesting in themselves, and the possibility to explore their mixture and intermixture in a number of ways, in an interactive way. So the piece is a dark space where you encounter sounds with your body, with your hands, whatever, and they are drawn out. They're relatively intense. Some of them are very large, physical, matter-like sounds of fire and earth and stuff like that. Others are more intimate, sounds that might contribute to little fragments of narrative or something. You're a sort of the film soundtrack for an invisible film that you're walking through, shall we say. And so that's what it is, a dark space where you can feel your way through a field of sounds.
Can you summarize the concepts you've historically explored through your work?
If I knew that, if I could summarize them, I would have solved some big problems for my life. Right?
That's why we're asking the question.
Yeah. Well, I guess.
Them,
yeah, I guess one way to approach this is to think about. So one whole angle is to consider the role of the human apparatus, the body, the senses, the mind, what it means to have those things.
So it is central to your work.
Yes, humanity is central to my work. And it's a bit of an irony that I use technologies to explore humanity.
Well, it is fine, because society and technology co-constitute each other, so...
Yes, that's one aspect of it. But I think another aspect of it is actually precisely through the alienness of the technology. The things that are most interesting to me about being human, excuse me, are things that are so familiar that they're in danger of being invisible to us, or impossible to critique effectively, or impossible to appreciate effectively, because we live them every day. They're banal. They are so familiar, they're invisible, and so it takes something as alien as the view of us through the eyes of a system that does not know us and is not us, to show us, in a way, how to see ourselves anew, shall we say, very simply. So that's one thing that I keep trying to do with my work, is to defamiliarize, to denature our experience of ourselves so that we can examine it, so we can experience it and value it and evaluate it and cherish it in ways that aren't possible when we're just being ourselves. So that's that kind of bounces around a lot of different works have that relationship there. Perception in general is something I'm very interested in. I'm very interested in the way the structures of our perceptual organs and the cortexes and the brain structures that contribute to perception contribute to the way we experience the world. I'm also fascinated with language in a way that's almost unresolved. I love language, I love to read, but I'm also suspicious of it. And I'm...
Because it is formatting consciousness?
The translation of something that is extremely multidimensional and rich and fluid into words is both a very powerful act and at the same time a dangerous one. Yeah. Because, and I love the quote. There's a quote from Peter Handke in his diaries, The Weight of the World, where he says, just as a note to himself, formulation is the beginning of forgetting. Don't write down the core of your inspiration for fear of not having access to them when you need them. That's a very important idea to me, that while words are important and to be able to capture something with a word is a very valuable thing, a very human thing, we need in parallel or at the same time or sometimes instead of that to hold off on that act of bringing it to that closure. Keep it open enough. Sometimes I think that an idea is too young. It needs to be thrown back into the lake, to let things find their place before we pin them down and say, okay, this means that, and therefore I'm only going to use the symbol now for this thing that is sometimes more useful as the thing it was rather than the symbol. So that relationship is really important to me and has surfaced in some of my work.
It reminds me very much of the conversation that 24 centuries ago Socrates and Plato had, where Socrates was telling Plato that he's basically conveying intelligence to a medium, to a papyrus, to a piece of paper, and that's not the way to go about it. And then that in the long run it will have numerous consequences, as we've seen. So basically, it was of the formatting of our thought through a medium. and his non-agreeing with it. So I can understand your wariness about it.
I mean, the complication there is that it's very, very powerful and important sometimes, and actually fundamentally important to me sometimes, to write about my process, to come find those words and to put them down. Because in some ways you don't step forward unless you can use a term as a stepping stone to move on. So somehow I've got in my head somehow there has to be this parallel system where you can both use the advantage of language and question it at the same time, and retain and don't lose the source of the word in using the word. So that's something that has come up, that comes up in strange ways in my work. In some works like Very Nervous System, it's central. In other ones, it's just a peripheral consideration. There are other things, but maybe that's enough of an answer for now.
Yeah. What about the topos, the land on which you work? Does the fact that you live in Canada have any specific context within your work? Is it related to that? In Australia, many artists are they claim that in their art, the land, being on that land, makes a difference.
I wouldn't be tempted to put it that way. Topos in the most general sense, perhaps. There is something I think that's possible. There's a way to think in relationship to certain structures of our civilization that's possible in Canada, because we are both outside of and right beside and kind of under the cliff of the United States, that is a unique space. It's why so much interesting media theory has come out of Canada, I think. And so I think living in the city of McLuhan is not incidental for me. I didn't read McLuhan before I made my early interactive pieces, and then when I read Understanding Media, I just went, oh my God, it's all, wow.
Which one do you consider the city of McLuhan? Because we are in Winnipeg.
Well, I can say, yeah, fair enough. Both, there you go. Both, I'll be political. I have more of an experience of the spirit of McLuhan in Toronto.
Yeah. No, but I found it very alive here as well, because Winnipeg is a city of 600,000-700,000 people, and we have about 400 members. The film group probably has more. So only in this building, like 1,000 people work within media art, which is. I don't think that ratio is anywhere else in the world even close. So there is something about the media, the understanding of the media that this territory allows.
Yeah, there's an inside-outsideness, which is also sort of typifies my relationship with the technology. I am very deep inside the technology because I program. I've built computers. I've written computer languages. I've done most of those things, most of the things that give me a sense of the technology. I have my inside technology cred, and yet I need to see it critique it, sort of take an outside point from almost inside it. And so that feels familiar. Maybe that's a familiar space to me because of this relationship we have to media in general in Canada. Inside or underneath or beside, but critical at the same time.
What do you consider your breakthrough project or your breakthrough exhibition?
Well, there's no question that Very Nervous System was the breakthrough project. It was 10 years of work, but it got started very quickly right at art school. I'd been in a state of great confusion. I didn't know if I had what it took to be an artist. I didn't seem to have any good ideas. I was just sort of thrashing around, kind of wannabe dilettante. I was living in a loft, but within the first week of my time at OCA, I had started work on what became Very Nervous System. It was just like that, and that occupied me from 1981 to 1991, and it also serves as a foundation for many of my later pieces because I learned so much through doing that piece. I like to think of the computer in my pieces as a sort of philosophical prosthesis, and it worked very much that way for me. It allowed me to ask questions that seemed kind of dead, like body-mind questions we've kind of thrown onto the heap pile of philosophical past. It allowed me to pose those questions in new and more visceral ways, and so I found that an incredibly powerful thing, and it it raised a lot of questions that I've since continued to ask or to ponder in other works, sometimes very different works. So it's by far it's definitely the breakthrough piece. I mean, I like to think that it's not the only piece, of the family, but it was a huge
What were
event.
the constraints in putting it up at that time?
Well, one of the most interesting constraints, so we're talking about 1982 now. When I looked at a computer, I immediately thought, it wants to talk to the world. And then I set about trying to find ways to make it talk to the world. And you just couldn't get parts that would allow you to do that. Analog to digital and digital analog converters were incredibly hard to find. And I just thought, these are essential. This is how we create a channel between this and the world. And that just seemed automatic and necessary. And I spent a huge amounts of time trying to find them, trying to buy them, at one point I was buying parts for missile guidance systems because that was the only way I could get these things. And it would take 6 months. I don't know what levels of clearance would, and what kind of shit would be going on to get those parts to me. But they were really rarefied, and that was a real challenge. Interestingly, I wouldn't really say that technology itself was the challenge. Apple II computers are powerful enough to start playing around. And once I decided I wasn't going to attempt to digitize whole video images, but was going to build little cameras with 8x8 matrices, so 64 pixel cameras, it made it possible to do real-time interaction without having to deal with huge amounts of data. And so, and money wasn't that expensive to do this stuff. The tools sucked. Everything had to be written in assembly code. So that was a challenge. But expectations and the pace of things were so slow that everything was possible. You just sort of work your way through. And when you needed something, I think I need a language. I'll write a language. I'll take a year to write a language so then I can make pieces faster. This computer isn't fast enough. I'll find a new way to make a new computer. It was really fun. It was challenging sometimes. It was really fun. In retrospect, I can talk better about what the challenges were because I look at what we have now. The fact that you can just go online and pose a question about some technical issue and you'll find innumerable sources of people struggling with the same issue. It would have been a miracle back then. So I was dealing with situations where there were bugs in the compilers. I was learning the C language, and there were bugs in the C compiler, and I didn't know whether the bugs were in my head because I didn't understand the language or they were in the compiler. So it was a confusing time. Maybe a bigger challenge in a way was the lack of any real rapport or understanding from the contemporary art world.
Has it changed today?
Sometimes, sort of. Not in a substantive way, I don't think. I think I'm surprised by how little that's changed. There is digital art in collections now. But they tend to collect, not always, but they tend to collect work that it reminds them of stuff that they understand. And a lot of work that is perhaps more cogent, more imperative, more necessary, is not digestible yet. And there seems to be still this kind of allergy thing. People like Janet Cardiff and George Miller are very careful to not call themselves media artists, even though they are, because that is immediately perceived in a certain way and separated away. So there are complicated,
even with the applications,
things.
Right? You either apply it to the media board or the visual arts board.
Yeah, and I make a point of, I have really spent the past 10 years trying to understand that world better, because I'm not comfortable with that space. But I'm not comfortable just saying, okay, well, I'm a media artist and I don't care about that. They're not going to show me. I don't care. Right? It's not so much that I don't care, but that I think there's important and valuable discussion going on there that I can contribute to, and there's important things that they're thinking about that we can learn from. This gulf is not serving us. So I seek shows that have no other technology in them. seek putting myself in that situation. Also because it's very challenging. I don't get a get out of jail free card because I know how to write C and I've got certain cred in the media art world. I've got to prove to them that with this pile of equipment that's pretty flashy, that I can do something that is subtle and rich enough that they can forget about that and just appreciate it as a work. And that's a challenge. It keeps me growing and learning.
That it is a part of the mainframe arts world. Legitimate.
It's not quite. In this case, it's not about seeking for legitimacy. There is part of that that's there, but it's also that I appreciate the challenge. I remember showing at a show at the School of the Arts Institute of Chicago. It was a very interesting show. It was set up by the textile department, the fiber department, which is a pretty conceptual fiber department in Chicago. And they did the show that included Very Nervous System as part of the show. And I was a little confused about why they'd put me in this context, but the show was called The Presence of Touch. And the fact that Very Nervous System, there's nothing that you touch, created this really, but there was a sort of virtual sense of touching. It made it a really interesting presence there. But showing in that context where Erwin Wurm had pounded 2 nails into a wall and wrapped a sweater around it and made a piece, and someone else was just doing line drawings, and that forced me to ask tough questions about whether I was doing the best I could with my medium, whether I was just skating on the power of my medium, or whether I was, doing as good a job with my medium as they were doing with their very limited, the marvelous things they were doing with their limited resources. For me, it was a really important question for me to ask.
So would you consider Very Nervous System as your most important work or most radical work, or would that go to some other work which you've developed? Like, what is it? If there was one work you could identify with, which one would that be?
Well, the easiest answer is Very Nervous System, certainly, because it was very foundational. It's hard to disentangle the threads of all the different pieces. I mean, the Giver of Names was very important to me as well. And it's also difficult to separate the difference between like that and the Giver of Names and the Very Nervous System were 10-year projects. And there's a kind of weight and heft and layeredness to those projects, which is impossible for any other projects to compete with. And yet, I enjoy and take seriously other works, but those works, just occupied. Those 2 works occupied 2 decades of my life. It's kind of hard to.
Half of your life, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. Well, I wish it was only half of my life.
Or
a little too old for that now.
So now we come to the point of art criticism. Do you believe that your work as an artist has been criticized adequately? Because I say this because critics can be a bit unsympathetic, or they are not understanding of all the facets in the art.
Yeah, I have rarely been slammed by a critic. I'm more likely to be ignored by a critic, and that is.
Which one hurts more?
Well, I don't know about hurt, but the hurt of being slammed in an interesting way is more useful than the hurt of being ignored.
Yeah.
The hurt of being ignored is not useful. It's just you don't learn anything from it. You just sort of my phone, which also sounds like one of the sounds in my piece. Oh, can't do that now. Back to the question. Yes, criticism.
I mean, it can be also. It doesn't really have to be a criticism by, even journalists who do not understand it. It can be by someone who does understand the whole process. Like at the beginning of BioArts, the biggest criticism came from Paul Virilio, from all people. You wouldn't think that he would be criticizing it, but it was, quite a strong criticism. So it can be ideological, it can be conceptual, it can be...
I found the first really satisfying writing about my work to come from people who took the time to sit and talk with me for long enough to realize that we had something in common. One of those situations was I was invited to a conference. Was I doing a show too? No, I think it was just a conference at the University of Windsor. And there was a horrible snowstorm. And the only way to get there, they canceled the flight, so the airlines put a bunch of us on the flight onto a limo and sent us to Windsor. So on this limo, I sat with Dot Tuer, who's who is, her background is in the theory of, or the history of colonial South America, but she has an interest in new media. And we sat, and in that car ride, we hashed out a sort of, found the intersections between our interests and found the language linkages, and where I would say a certain word and she would misinterpret it, we forged those, we welded them together, and she ended up writing the text for my Governor General's Award citation. So that was really great, because we were forced into a situation where we had time to erase the misunderstandings that seem to often happen, because you're coming in technology, you use words in certain ways, and in other contexts those words mean something else, and they set off off on all these wild goose chases that are not meaningful to the actual conversation. So those are great. Another interesting example was I had a retrospective in the Oakville Galleries outside of Toronto, and the Globe and Mail art critic, what's her name? I'll remember it in a second. She came to the show and she was a bit mystified, and so people at the gallery just carefully drew her into a state of understanding how this connected to things she cared about, and it ended up being a lovely and insightful review. But there was a huge step there. There was a big blockage for her to get there. When she did, that was good.
So there is a positive role to criticism as well.
Well, I don't know if that's an example of the positive role. I mean, it's always great when you get a nice critique. There is value to having someone put you in another context, to put you in the context of their intellectual world, and help you to see your links between things. Because I work very intuitively, and so it's very helpful for me when someone draws lines back down to pegs on the earth, so I realize that I'm not living in a void. I'm actually connected to all these different things going on around me.
You have received numerous awards. Ars Electronica, for example, falls to my mind. So you have been recognized as a leader in this field, right, of research and also displaying art. Can you describe the perception of the experience of providing leadership to the art world, if you feel this is the case?
Well, one of the interesting things is that people then expect you to continue to play the role you've already played. I remember being at the Transmediale Festival in Berlin a few years ago and having people saying, "How come you've forsaken interactive art?" And I felt like I'd paid my dues. I spent a good 25 years doing it, writing about it, etc. And doing good interactive art is hard. And there are times, and I've always said right from the beginning that interactivity is just a tool in the artist's palette, and it should be just something you have available to put in where it's appropriate. But for people, I was betraying a certain trust when I was doing non-interactive work, because I was betraying the cause, exactly. So there's a challenge to that. I think one of the biggest challenges for me is, I was proclaimed a pioneer in 1990 when I was 30. That's like a death sentence, right? I remember meeting Woody Vazolka at ZKM years later, and I introduced myself, and he said, "You're not David Rokeby." I said, "Yes." He said, "No, you're not old enough." But I felt like at 30, I was already in the dustbin of history, right? And so I've had to fight to, partly out of my own interest, to do interesting work in different directions, to remind people that I'm alive and kicking. And so that was one, I must say, very exciting thing for me about getting the Golden Nika at Ars Electronica in 2002 was this was 12 years after I'd already, you know, been defined, and to be able to redefine myself on a scale like that was really affirming. That was really wonderful. On the other hand, because that work, Enchant, was a bit atypical and not a friendly sort of interactivity, although it was interactive, there was a lot of murmuring about whether it deserved the prize that year. And so when I got up to give in the Künstler Forum, to give my artist talk, even the head of the jury who had given the prize got up and sort of said that he was disgruntled by the piece and that he wasn't sure that he liked it. And so I had to stand up and say, and it was a very powerful experience. I had to get up and say, I love this piece. I think it's valuable. This is why. I know it's difficult. I know it's challenging. And that was a really exciting moment because people went back to the work and spent time and figured it out. And that work ended up getting written a lot about on a scholarly level because people took the time and saw that I was pushing far into something that was not easily accessible in the Ars Electronica. You know, I understand what interactivity is. I do something and there's a response. No, this was more complicated. This is a world. This is a community that you're invading, that you're challenging, that rejects you, that welcomes you, that responds to you, that sees you as a threat. You know, this is not simple interactivity.
Well, that's what constitutes leadership, right? Also taking, even the theorists, academics to the other side to understand the work, right? Because many of them maybe don't have the tools for understanding the work. As we know, you always need tools. And we could see here, for your work at Actual, you have a complete mastery of the process. You are completely involved just in programming it, in designing and displaying it, etc. But do you also do collaborative work? And what collaborative work could you point out?
I don't collaborate a lot because I am a perfectionist but not a fascist. So it makes it hard I have to find the right people to collaborate with. They have to be as committed as I am. I'm not good at working with a team of people who are sort of half there and they do little bits of the thing. I need a team of people who are 100% committed, who are going to do whatever it takes with me, and that's great. And it's rare that I find people who I have that relationship with, but rewarding, exciting when it happens. I think the first example was a piece I did with a New York video artist, Paul Guerin, who used to be...
For Ars Electronica.
Yeah, well, yes. So that was one of the third of our collaborations was the one that went to Ars Electronica. And that was fascinating because we were quite different, but really... but both, totally focused on making it happen. And, we found a good space to work together. And the resulting piece was kind of crazy and exciting and terrifying. Although I don't think it was ever as terrifying. It's called Border Patrol. I don't think it was ever as terrifying for anyone as it was for us. When we first had these damn cameras that would track us dead on and follow us around the room, putting crosshairs over our heads, and it was really scary to realize how easy it was to create something like that and to have it operational. When we showed it first in Korea, and there people were looking at themselves in the crosshairs on the screen, checking their hair, and giggling, which may have just been a nervous reaction, but it was very different from our "oh my God" response. But that was a really rewarding. That was a rewarding one, and when I do large-scale public artworks, I have to put together a team, and I have a group of friends, including some artists and architects. One in particular, Michael Awad from Toronto, who loves to take on these almost impossible projects and join me in these adventures. So those are the rare but very satisfying collaborations that I do.
Yeah. And in general, are you satisfied with the level of art-science collaborations we have in the world today? It's been 30 years since we've started them on a more serious level.
Well, I've never really done an art-science collaboration myself. I've been on a lot of panels and a lot of discussion groups about them. I think the challenge, as I see it more from the outside, rather than someone who's actually done one, is that it's really a kind of delicate dating process. And there are usually a bunch of bureaucracies in the way of the dating process. It's only going to work if people on both sides of the divide find ways of trusting each other, find common language, find a way to give each other the benefit of the doubt. You're asking me something that sounds crazy. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but I trust you, and I'm going to do my best to figure out how to make that possible. Or you're telling me I can't do this thing that it's, my vision says it has to be this way, and you're telling me it can't be, and I have to trust that together we'll find a resolution that will be technically feasible and will answer my artistic needs. This is a very difficult thing to deal with, partly because the training is very different, for example, for an artist and a scientist. And then again, an engineer, to put these things, the whole understanding of the role of subjectivity and expression and versus specifications and problem solving versus question asking, all these sorts of things create all sorts of challenging scenarios. Okay, so that's one side. The other side that I see is that there's usually a question on the part of the science side: how can we use these artists, rather than seeking a true collaboration in the space that is neither science nor art. Right? If you really want to have an encounter between two different cultures, you almost have to create a new world which doesn't fall under the rule set of one or the other, where a new set of rules can be generated out of that collaboration. Otherwise, it is art in the service of science, or science in the service of art. And that's not really what these collaborations are about, ideally, on a philosophical level. They're attempts to reach across from two severed halves of one thing that has, in a way, a need to be together, and to start to build bridges across those things. And the bridges don't get built when it's viewed too much like, well, this is a way we can get a little extra money from the Canada Council into our research fund, or this, or there are so many things at play that it's difficult to make it happen. When it does happen, it's a beautiful thing, but it's such a human thing. It's so much about the willingness of the people involved to build those bridges and live on those bridges.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because maybe it started off at with the wrong footing, because C.P. Snow in his text The Two Cultures actually speaks about the lack of appropriation of science and scientific models in the arts. So for him, it's we've come up with this huge knowledge in the sciences. Why hasn't the arts appropriated it? Why hasn't the arts why aren't the artists skilled? The humanities skilled in understanding science? It was never the other way around. Never, it didn't even cross his mind that the arts and humanities had this, huge database of knowledge that they could contribute. It was just perceived as not a possibility. And I think, and you're right. The intersection would be what allows for both of them to meet. Because at both ends, at the radical end, it's very hard, right? They're on a radically different positions. But has there been any, because you're a pioneer, you're a researcher, right? You research with the tools of technology. Has there been any recognition by the technology centers, by the scientific centers, and academia in general, of the work you have done in that field?
Well, there's recognition of the work that I've done in odd ways. There have been interesting and sometimes comically flawed scenarios. The most interesting and indicative and troubling one was a relationship I had with a group of scientists who had gotten into their head that very nervous system might be useful for treating Parkinson's disease. Because in Parkinson's disease, one of the things you do is you lose your ability to sort of will yourself into movement. It's the classic thing where you throw a ball at them, they can catch it, but they can't choose to go and pick up the ball and throw it to you. That takes a willful initiation they're not capable of. That's one kind of symptom side. I'm not an expert, so I'm just giving a sort of my understanding of it. But their notion was that the interactivity involved in vagus nervous system would mean that any movement they did make would then go external into a system that would generate an external response which they could then use to ramp up. There was sort of that feedback mechanism would be beneficial in some way. So they did some rudimentary testing where they borrowed an installation and they put it in a room in a hospital, and they took Parkinson's patients in for an hour a week, various of them, and then they studied over the course of a few weeks. And they found that all of them showed positive improvements in coordination and ability to will movement as a result of their experience of the installation. So great. So they went, then they decided, okay, so now we go to the clinical trial, or we prepare for clinical trials. And to do that, they according to classic scientific method, medical research, they would have to identify which exact parts of the experience were the active parts. So they were trying to sort of like chop vagus nervous system, which was, literally I gave them the installation as I'd made it as an art piece. Then they tried to chop it up into little subsections by coding little bits of what it did and trying those out. And of course, none of that exhibited any positive effects at all. So, and unfortunately, and I don't know what to blame exactly on this, they did not have the funding or the willfulness or the desire or the fearlessness to say, there's something here, we can't identify it by splitting it into atoms, but it's still there. We know it's there, we're going to continue the research. So they dropped the research because they couldn't fit it into the classic justifiable model.
Quantifiable,
right? So they couldn't. So it's precisely they could not accept that something could have an aggregate, synergetic, art-generated, humanist impact that could not be, dissolved down into a set of theorems and equations and stimulus response relationships or whatever, so that they couldn't stand by it.
When was that?
This was back in maybe the early 90s.
Maybe you should approach one of those hospitals again.
Maybe.
Times have changed, so maybe they'll kind of appreciate more the integrity of the art piece, because that's what it is about, right? You can't actually break it down to elementary substances.
Well, when you're talking about relationships with human beings, which that is a human being having a relationship with themselves through a system, all these other channels are active. So many channels simultaneously, and the artwork is designed to leverage off of all of those channels, and none of them is sufficient. All of them contribute and coalesce and form this coherent relationship that can't be split into individual subparts.
Yeah. So it seems to me that there is collaboration, between the arts and sciences, but we haven't really come up with collaborative models as such. There hasn't been enough of, I'm not saying there's a need to come up with the ideal collaborative model, but yet improve the ones that we have at the moment, the ones that bridge the gap.
And it's not just, maybe the key is not collaborative model so much as evaluative model. Because even if you have a good collaborative model, like how do you evaluate the success of the project? How do you determine if it deserves more funding or more resources, etc.? And I think the challenge there, I really think that the role of the artist is to be comfortably uncertain.
Comfortably uncertain.
Like to be okay with not being able to justify what they're doing at this exact moment, and to be open to be as open as possible and to be responsive to on many different channels to what's going on around them, and responding in a way they can't write down, justify, can't even write a grant application for really, but to make something out of that awareness that cannot be justified, that can't be quantified, can't be validated precisely, and fearlessly or fearfully, but still persist in doing that, in putting that work out there. So that, I think that's an even bigger challenge than aesthetic problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for these relationships that scientists, bureaucrats, all these people base their power on validation, on the process of validating, on verifying, on justifying. on crossing the T's, dotting the I's. And this is all good. I'm glad engineers work really hard to make sure our bridges don't fall down. It's like I respect the fact that there is real value in that process, but it's not the only process. It's almost like it's perpendicular to the artistic process.
Yes.
That you can't even define, you can't even talk about the artistic process in the words that are necessary to do that. And it's not to deny the value of this or that, but between them they create space, right? Between them they define something new. And this new thing is really valuable, but you cannot reduce this to this, or you lose the whole dimensionality of the whole thing. So how can you make your collaborator comfortable with the fact that we may never know how and why and if this is really good? We all know as artists, you do the work, the night before every opening, I'm sure my work is shit. I have no way of knowing that it's good. I have no way of knowing it's good. Scientists know that their experiment worked or didn't, and whether they learned or didn't learn something from that. I never know that. Getting a prize helps you, but maybe that's because someone on the jury owed someone else a favor. Maybe they just thought it was your. That doesn't even tell you for sure.
But last night for the opening, you could see many happy faces coming out from the installation.
This is always right? It's a you don't know. It's so you don't know. You don't know if they had the experience you wish they would have had.
No, but
there's validation, of course. There's occasionally people will come. I remember the first time in my first show, A Very Nervous System, one person came and spent 2 hours in the piece, and then a week later she said to me, "The world has changed since I was in your piece." That's about as good as it gets, right? But she couldn't even say, she wouldn't be able to tell me why or what. Just said the world has felt different.
Well, because she hasn't broken it down in substances like these scientists.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be. But those are these validations. These are crumbs. They're lovely crumbs, but they're crumbs in comparison to what most people use as their validations. And those validations are things you can stack. You can build into piles. So that instability, that insecurity, is an important part of it, and I think it's one of the stumbling blocks to that kind of relationship.
I mean, it is quite and as you mentioned, it is a question of aesthetics. It's an aesthetic experience. Your exhibition. It is also, I like to think, a phenomenological experience because you can break down the lived experience of dark matter into the lived space, the lived time, so subjective understanding even of interrelations with other participants in the same installation. So the whole context of understanding your installation can be broken down to these substances and then described or analyzed. But does it provide any specific metaphors? Your installation, some you would like to share with us?
I don't know about metaphors.
Because it's an aesthetic category, right? The metaphor.
Yeah, I know that the thing that keeps me interested in this line of work, this particular line of work, is a curiosity about what it means to engage with things that have partial presence, that are both absent and present, like an area of space that responds in a certain way, that has no physical pushback, but creates sometimes radical vibrations in the air that you sense nonetheless. And what state we are in when we engage with these things. The same thing when we do things on our smartphone and our fingers gliding across a sheet of undifferentiated glass, and yet we're imagining a physics and there's information flow, there's a whole experience that's going on. How do we have that experience? And in particular, I'm interested in what we contribute to that experience, what we project into that experience, what parts of the incomplete picture we fill in with a sort of act of imagination, an act of sort of almost sensory projection, that we confer a non-existent object with some physical presence through an act of imagination. I'm very interested in that space. So that's not so much a metaphor as a way of, it is closer to a sort of a speculative phenomenology or something. I don't know. Thinking about the ways almost a projective phenomenology, that part of.
Another aesthetic category I'll be interested for you to define, if possible, in regard to your piece, is the interface, because that piece is very strong in the treatment of interface theoretically and practically. So can you tell me a bit more about the interfaces you use in that piece and generally in your work? And maybe to put it in an even more general context, what is the role of the interface today as opposed to, I don't know, 30 years ago?
Well, I've written a lot about interface over the years. I guess the most significant thing I've had to say about interface was the subscript to the title of one of my texts. It's called Constructing Experience Interface as Content, because I think it was something, especially in the 90s when I wrote text, it was hard to understand that the interface itself, it's almost like a rephrasing of the medium is the message from McLuhan, put into the framework of the interface. That the interface, and especially in the context of transparent interfaces, supposed transparent interfaces, user-friendly interfaces that we don't have to think about while we use them. Because I'm interested in the way that we then internalize interfaces. We carry them, again, we complete them in the same way that we complete things in dark matter. And we take them inside ourselves. And if they seem to be transparent, we actually, there's it casts a shadow inside us. We carry the incomplete parts, the parts that's not transparent, like a fragment inside us. It's a sort of complicated thing to talk about. But the best way to talk about that is to say that with some of my early very nervous system pieces, I would seek to use sounds. I have some sounds like that in dark matter, some sounds that are so physically satisfying, and I would that you just wanted to make those sounds, and then to position them in space-time, i.e. you had to move with a certain vigor and aggressiveness to get them. So I remember one sound, a huge Japanese taiko drum, and I have to jump in the air and flail myself with all my might to get this sound. And the sound was completely satisfying, and I spent a whole day just, yes, getting the sound. I almost threw my back out because I was bashing myself against something that wasn't there. So if you hit a big drum like that, there is a recoil that is commensurate to the sound, and it's like it's all this integrated. In this case, I was throwing myself, and then I had to stop myself. I had to be the drum. I had to be the thing to keep myself from falling over, and that created this enormous tension, which messed up my back for a long period of time. This is related to this question of how we contribute and how we contribute to the effect of a partial interface. We become both halves of it. We become ourselves and the complete part of the interface, and so that's what I mean by internalizing. We become it. It changes us in the act of us using it, and so that's really important to me.
You also said that when we internalize it, it is incomplete. So when does it become completed, or does it does the completion require a compensation with something else?
I think the tricky part is that the incompleteness is something we don't know we've added to ourselves. I put it really interestingly in a text recently, and I can't remember. I have to remember how I formulated it. It's almost like when you have a problem with an interface. Let's just go speculative and say an interface is actively making you depressed.
Okay.
Okay. Let's just say that because of the it's got a utility, you use it, but somehow it's just it. Do you go to a shrink to deal with a depression, or you talk to to the interface designer? Like, the problem is you don't know who to blame for the fact that you're not feeling right, right? So as we're shifting the rules of engagement with reality, or with quasi-reality, and they have impact on our psyche, on our experience of the world, on our social relationships, we don't No, we haven't developed a language to diagnose ourselves, to try to understand how to make it okay, especially if we don't realize that there's something new there at play. We just don't feel right. And so my relationship to the whole interface question is to try to get people who design interfaces to ask deeper questions. Not just, does the interface work? Can I measure its efficacy because, you know, people hit the target 99% of the time, or they get confused one time out of 50, therefore it's okay. But am I creating a space of existence that is positive, beneficial, that is, I don't even know the words to apply to it right now, but I don't know if you understand what I mean. This becomes much more significant as we fill more and more of our world with algorithms and interfaces. I mean, it goes beyond just interfaces that we identify as interfaces, but the algorithm soup that we're starting to swim through.
Yeah, for some reason while you were speaking, it kind of triggered some conceptual thoughts in me about McLuhan's concept of humanity transitioning from the visual space to the auditive space, and that we're kind of undertaking this odyssey. And your work, which you presented, Dark Matter, but also what you're saying now, seems to be following that trajectory. Seems to be saying that there is this other part in us which we are not using, that we are not able to yet, spatially kind of position ourselves within that space or use our inner abilities because we have given dominance to the to our visual sight. So now we're in a period where we're kind of reasserting and we're moving somewhere else. Whether it is the auditive or not, I don't know.
Yeah, that's sort of that's kind of metaphorically correct to what I was saying. I think what's interesting is that because in order to code something efficiently, we have to understand it. We can only make allowances in code for what we understand, and we cannot make allowances in code for the things we don't have formulae for or whatever. Yeah. So we're coding effectively for one dimension of a multidimensional space, and we do not know what complicated shadows that one-dimensional action casts on these other spaces. And and because of the language we use around these things and the metrics we use to measure them, we are in danger of making complicated mistakes and leading ourselves in bad directions, shall we say, because we'll find efficient ways of doing things, not realizing that it's shutting something else down. So this is partly related to the interest I have in using the computer to help me see things about myself that are hard to understand, things that are not hard to value, hard to make sense out of. That if by an ironic twist I can use the computer to make the very thing that the computer tends to obscure visible, then I've made some sort of corrective action, right? Then the computer's presence attains a certain balance, that it does not simply overshadow or obliterate or obscure something else that is just simply incompatible, but it continues to protect the space where those things that can't be articulated logically or theoretically, you can use it to create a space where those things are protected and allowed to continue to flourish alongside that.
Is that the role that the arts always had and the artist, or is it changed with the obvious advent of technologies and the use of them by artists? Are we experiencing maybe a transformation of our society through technology?
Certainly we are. What sort, I don't know. I must admit that I am darkly attracted to the notion that every new major technological shift invokes a period of dark ages. And maybe things like Donald Trump are just a visible front edge of that. Who knows? But
is that? I mean, is there a role for biopolitics as well? What I'm saying is, every change in technology does lead us to a transformation, but it is also led by someone, right? Because technologies are not only appearing naturally. Of course, you know, we see that all the companies are just buying all the technology there is, and then they're discarding the ones or shelving the ones that they think are not going to be of help. Sometimes they make mistakes, like Kodak, right, with the digital camera. But very often, I mean, like, we've all been to these, you know, science fairs, and we see that, you know, many artists or people involved in arts and science technology, they're, you know, selling their products for, you know, a few $100,000. But then what the companies can do is, you know, just stop them from developing or use them if they need a certain part. So it is directed somehow, right? It is directed by business. It is directed by government. We can't say that it just exists spontaneously. Yeah,
and I think that has been one of the interesting roles for artists, especially artists involved in, from my personal experience, artists involved in the early years of media art. And as we see more and more university research guided towards product development and under corporate sponsorship, we see fewer and fewer places where there's disinterested research, which is open to discovering that the very basis of the research is flawed or damned, or you know, this is something that hard science has always supposedly been good at discovering that a negative result in an experiment is as valuable as a positive one, because you learn as much or more from the negative result. In our technologically led science exploration, that doesn't work that way so much, because the aim ultimately is a successful implementation of a scientific notion and a technological, you know, manifestation as a product that is worth making money. And in particular, so much focus now is on unicorns, and like, if you can't talk in numbers of billions, then it's barely worth anyone's time, as far as I can tell. And so where's the room for people who make subsistence, you know, living at the cutting edge of whatever, right? It's kind of getting squeezed out, and you see that, you know, even you see the really smart kids coming out of a media art school, you know, the draw to get into the industry has got to be enormous, because the resources are so much better. So how? Or so they think. Or so they think, right? But you know, but the at least the illusion is there. Yeah. I've always admired that line. You know, in the scientific notebooks they have, every scientist has to have a scientific notebook, and then, you know, when they write by hand, but then when they stop, you know, during the day, a line has to be drawn anywhere they've stopped, right? And then there is a horizontal line and there's a vertical line to the end of the page, which is to signify, first of all, so that they can't forge, right? So that they can't say, well, I've discovered this, you know, back in 2003, whereas the diaries, scientific diaries, would show that they have not. Right. But more than that, it is to show that the also negative results, or you know, research which didn't end anywhere was as meaningful, because you can draw upon it. Yeah. You cannot erase it, right? Yeah. Nothing gets erased, right? You know, but there is a line, and we know how it went. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. I think such a simple tool. Maybe we should have it in the arts as well. You know, it's probably useful. Do you think that art is today more socially responsive, just being affected by the huge crisis, and more socially responsive than when? Than when you started, because we've gone through the period of, you know, somewhat of a transformation. I mean, this would be probably a question tied to politics, to economy, to, you know, kind of the wider picture surrounding the arts. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I certainly felt like the artistic environment when I was at art school was pretty politically active and engaged.
Today we see something else. It's like a
Today the resources and the communications channels are so different that it just forms differently. So you have groups of people with an active critical interest in things that are forming cross-discipline, which is good, through Twitter, internet, Facebook, whatever, just finding lines of similar relations that way. So you see critical designers. I mean, I think you see more of people in a variety of fields trying to take critical stances, not located specifically in the arts. I think the arts will always have that position, and I don't know if I would read it as being more or less right now. There are some high-profile examples right now. I think of Oliver Eliasson and his climate change and solar light bulb things, for example.
The reason why I asked that question is that we have such a huge crisis of capitalism at this point. Mm-hmm. We've had it since 2008 for sure. Mm-hmm. And yet, as you point out, in the 70s, we seem to have more of a politically engaged art scene, mm-hmm. right? Whereas today, it has become more like those words, the arts industry. It's no longer, the arts field, the arts sector, it's an arts industry. So everyone starts to behave more in the sense of the industrial logic, of the...
Yes, everything, branding,
yeah, Well, we had to do business plans, but in Australia, here we do strategic plans, but still, they're very similar.
Basically.
We also have to do marketing plans, so in a way, we comply with the demands of the industry, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that must be leaving a mark.
It seems to me that the arts world is always in danger of inheriting the worst business practices of 10 years ago. This seems because it seems like there's a negative trickle down.
Yeah. Negative trickle down. I like that.
Yeah. That there's always going to be frustration in the arts field because it's a fuzzy, complicated business with not enough resources, etc. So we're always looking for solutions. We tend to seek those hardcore business-like solutions from old ideas in business that have already been cast aside by business. It's just a kind of an irony that struck me. We'll get into a certain kind of destructive cost cutting just when everyone's realized that that's completely self-defeating, or whatever. I mean, so that's a bit of a challenging problem. And so we're being asked to engage in kinds of business practices that don't make sense in the age where the cutting edge business practices, studies of disruption theory and things like that, we're playing an old game, and it doesn't make any sense.
So why are we doing that?
I don't know exactly. I don't know if it's because I think we don't make it our business to be spending all our time researching and thinking about business, and yet we're told we have to grow up.
Yeah.
So because we don't have the time or the interest to be at the edge researching what is contemporary business practice. We grasp for what appears to be there, which is always going to be the thing that is now in the remainders bin at the local bookstore that looks promising, and we read it. And I don't know, I'm sort of caricaturing it a bit.
So has the role of arts and artists changed with the obvious advent of info and biotechnologies and all the other nanotechnologies which are coming? Are we experiencing a transformation of a sort in society, in the cultural field? So is technology enabling transformation that the artists are seeing, so that we can redefine ourselves?
At its best, I think the technology is making it easier to reach into a wide variety of practices with less investment of money and skill sets, etc. So I think, I think of biohacking toolkits, things that you could not have done 10 years ago. The toolsets that we have available to us now to experiment in all sorts of ranges that used to be the privileged territory of sort of advanced research labs. Those are significant things. We also have powerful and in some ways alarming communications tools at our disposal. It's easier and easier to become aware of everything else that's going on in our particular field of interest. And that is a positive and potentially a negative at the same time. I think that there are times in the creative process when willful blindness is a very powerful and necessary tool, and it's hard to be willfully blind when you have instant access to all the relevant information. I worry more about my students in that context, you know, in the YouTube generation, where you can find amazing videos of just about everything you could possibly imagine. How do you set out to do? How would I set out, thinking about how I started out as an artist, how would I start out as an artist now in the presence of all the information? I thrived in the vacuum that was there. So that's a bit of a challenge. There is something characteristic about early pioneer media art, which was that anyone who was doing it was desperately passionate about what they were doing, because otherwise there's no way you'd be doing it, because it was too hard. And the presence of so many rich toolkits and tools and devices means that you don't need to be nearly as committed to do stuff now. And the potentials that the technologies that are available now allow are fantastic, but the sort of tempering of the soul that resulted from having to commit so strongly to something and fight a lot of fights just to even remind yourself you're not insane trying to pursue this line of thought was a very powerful forge also. And so it's maybe the really bright ones will always find their way through that. But I do wonder about the impact of that.
How important is ethics in your work?
It's very important, although not always visible, I guess. It's probably very visible in the surveillance works. But I'm a bit of a pragmatist when it comes to ethics. I'm interested in raising ethical questions. I'm not interested in posing answers. I like to create spaces where a question, often ethical, can be posed in a space that does not collapse quickly into gut instinctual resolution. You know, where an ethical question is teased open for longer than usual, so that we don't fall into an over simplistic resolution, but we dwell in the question. That so I sometimes feel it's my job to create a space where we're forced or drawn or induced into keeping a question in a more ambiguous than usual state for longer, so that it settles out in more interesting ways and potentially finds resolutions we wouldn't normally consider if we just jumped at something. So that, to me, it's a complicated ethical space.
Are art institutions more open than they were when you were starting in accepting your work, displaying?
Well, naturally they are. I have my certain kinds of validation, which means they can feel justified that they should be able to show me without someone telling them that they're not doing their job. This is an art. You don't hear that so often anymore.
No, but has the world of the big art biennales opened? And,
Well, I've shown in them.
Yeah.
I whether they've opened or not is another question because of the complicated politics of those things. Biennales are complicated institutions that feel like they have to keep up with whatever is happening. So they have all sorts of complicated reasons to want to incorporate or to be open, not necessarily out of the love of openness, but the need to feel that they're keeping up with the Joneses.
Like the 97 Documenta, that was kind of a labor of love as well. Right?
Yeah. I was at the 86 Biennale in Venice, which was a response to the 84 or 85 Les Amis Thériault at the Centre Georges Pompidou. Oh, we've got to do something, you know, I mean, it's, you know, so I'm a bit, you know, I question sometimes the motivations for this openness. There's a bit of a difference between being, you know, lots of curators will talk to me who wouldn't talk to me before. Whether they'll actually commit their institution to buying my work or not is still a challenge.
Yeah, because they do have budgets, right? You know, the big art galleries. And they are there to commission, right? Artwork.
Some of them are, yes. Hopefully, some of them are. Not all of them are. A lot of them. The AGO, for example, has very little money to actually do arm's length purchasing of works. They always have to find a relationship with a collector who's going to front some money to allow them to acquire works. So it's a complicated negotiation of many levels of power. You know,
it's also the maintenance, right, of when you meet the artwork.
The maintenance is a whole other can of worms, which is a very important one, and one which I've spent way too much time for my own good attending to, because when I sell a work to a museum, I spend a lot of time documenting and preparing the work for delivery trying to deliver it in a responsible way, so that there's a reasonable hope that they could resuscitate it if it needed to be refactored and re-implemented in some way.
Where do you see the biggest experiment in arts happening today? Would it be the social media sphere? Would it be still the white box, you know, the research institutes?
I don't know. I mean, certainly I have a lot of admiration for things like the Rax Collective and the kind of work that they're doing on the intersection of technology and social activism and stuff like that. I think that's a really valuable space. It's not a space I feel I can work in for whatever reason, but I think that's a really vital space.
Michelle's been waiting for a little while. If you wanted to talk to her for
we'll finish this. We're coming to the last question.
Okay.
But I don't have a definitive answer to that. I don't know.
And do you think, I mean, there is always this issue of validation. You know, we've had the Western art canon for a very long time. Things are changing because also geographically the world is expanding. There is a lot of work coming from the Orient, a lot of work coming from Africa. And also technologically we've changed a lot. So do you think that you know, what we knew as the Western art canon is still valid? I mean, you can answer it in terms of you know, market, institutions, or you know.
I think that the art world as a world always needs a canon, whatever that canon may be, because I find the art world to be incredibly insecure. It's everything about the art world is fraught with insecurity. We don't know exactly what's really valuable. We don't know what's really good, and there's all this forging of consensus about what's good and what's amazing and what's brilliant, and so I think it all hinges on an evolving canon that a bunch of people have agreed upon as being brilliant, and where that's pointing to at this moment, so people can have a certain amount of confidence acclaiming a work and feeling comfortable doing that. That canon is not important to me at all. It has a sort of structural role in the art world, I think. And at a certain point it was the Western canon, and it's shifting to accommodate other things, and that's in parallel with the natural diversification of our culture. But the canon's never going to disappear because it's like the rope that we lead ourselves through the dark along. Apparently, if we want to have the confidence to draw large funding bases and build big institutions and stuff like that, it's and the only danger is if the canon is not constantly shifting in response to the broadening of our horizons and the shifting of the issues and considerations and definition of art and scope of art and all those sorts of things.
Well, thank you very much for your comprehensive answers.